Welcome to Music Monday number 3. In this video, I'm going to explain some of the things that I went over in my Music Monday number 1 and 2, and I'm going to actually break them down so you can understand them a lot better. First of all is reading music. So reading music is actually something that's not too difficult. I often hear people say, yeah, I never actually got the chance, or I never actually learned to read music. And I always think, well, you could always start to do that. And I always kind of want to tell them how easy it is, but I don't know how to. So I'm making these videos so I could show people how easy it is to begin to read music. Of course, reading music comes at different levels. You could have advanced level reading music and you can have beginner level. So let's start at the beginner level. Let's talk about the basics. And it's pretty straightforward and it all actually makes sense. And there's certain things that we can do and remember to make it easier. Let's get into it. We're going to start with the treble clef. The treble clef is this symbol. So you have your swirl, kind of goes up here, and then it has that little, kind of like a comma looking thing down here. Okay? That's our treble clef. Our treble clef tells us where our notes are going to be. I would like to just explain it like the first line because that's what makes the most sense to me. And if we're looking at the first line, we're going to be looking at the letter E. So we have E right here on the first line, and a good way to basically memorize all the lines is a saying, and that saying would be, every good band deserves fans. And it's not that hard to remember because it makes sense. Bands work hard, and it took them a while to do what they do, so they deserve fans. So let's write the other ones. We have E on the first line. We have G on the second line. The third line we have B. So a good thing to think about is that our B is our middle line. So a good reference point is if we're trying to look at a note that's somewhere above or below or around this area, instead of thinking all the way from the bottom line and then having to go up, we could think certain reference points. Okay, our middle line is our B. Okay, which leads us to our fourth line, which is a D. So D right there, and then our last line is our F. Okay, so there are our lines. So you're counting up the lines on what's called the staff. This is a musical staff. Okay, and on the staff we have lines and we have spaces. And these lines and spaces just follow the order of the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. There's no flats, there's no sharps on sheet music unless it's labeled. So when we're just drawing out each note and we're saying it's an E, G, B, D, whatever it is, we just write the note on the line, no flats or sharps on the lines. If there is a flat or sharp, we actually label it and you can actually see it. So that also makes it a lot easier for thinking, okay, sharps and flats, things start to seem to get kind of crazy at that point. But when you actually dive into how they notate music and certain things they do to make it easier, it's like, oh, it's actually not as mind-boggling as you'd expect. So let's move on to the spaces. We did the lines, and now we're going to do the spaces. So as you see, we have 5 lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines in our actual staff, and then we have 4 spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4. So in those 4 spaces, we have an F, A, C, and an E, and a good saying to remember that is there's a face in the space. Okay? So with that, we're going to look at our spaces, and we're going to have F-A-C-E. It's a face, so a good way to remember that, is to get a sort of different way of depicting it in your brain. So here I'm looking at F-A-C-E. Okay, I could try to remember that in my brain and visualize that, but a really good way I find a better way to remember it quicker is to change it up and to add some imagination. Okay, so in my mind I'm going to think about the lines of the sheet music, and I'm going to think of someone's face in one of the spaces, like doing a funny face or something. And that right there is going to engage something in my brain that's different than what I'm looking at. And little things like that will help create basically more networks for your memory to be able to connect with certain things. So then when you're thinking about certain things, your mind can have multiple places to connect this memory. That's more psychological, kind of how memories work and stuff. So I guess I'll explain that a little more. And that's a memory is a basically certain point in your brain. And there are certain branches, that neural pathways that lead to certain senses and certain things that lead up to your memory. So you have, let's say, visual sense leading up to that memory. You have hearing, you have taste, you have a picture that leads to that memory, but that picture also connects to another memory. See what I'm saying? So in our brain we have this network of things going on, and if we can kind of create more areas for that one memory to branch off on, now we have more context to be able to, and more things to be able to make that memory stronger in our brain. And that's the hypothesis, at least. So it seems to work for me, and there are studies that are done that show when you sort of create images or sort of different imaginative things in your brain that are different than what you're looking at or perceiving, kind of make your own version of it, then it really helps you remember it. So there we go. We have face in the space. Also, every good band deserves fans. And now we could kind of talk about this a little bit. So if we're going up A, B, C, D, E, F, G, that's essentially what we're doing. So if we're going, and then of course because of music, we only go A through G. So if you see, we have E, F, and I'm going from line to space to line to space in order, ascending, like ascending up a staircase. Okay, so we have E, F, G, and then here now we start in A, B, C, D, E, F, G, just like our alphabet. And there's, again, no sharps, no flats. So it's actually pretty simple. If we want to know where our C note is, we could think, okay, we could think face. So we could think, okay, that's the third space. Or, like I was saying, we could think our middle line is our B. So one up from B is C. So we could think, okay, middle's B, so it's one up from the middle. So that's our C right there. It's also really good to know that our bottom line is our basically last space. Not basically, it is. So our bottom line is our last space. Okay, and we can analyze this further in a second, but just at the base level, realize that, and realize that we're looking at, you see, an E and an E, same note, so it's going up an octave. So this is a lower version, this is a higher pitch version by one exact octave. Okay, same thing if we look at the F. Our F is our first space, and our first space is the same note as our last line. And with this method, you could sort of think about it when you're here as well, or here in the same perspective, but that gets a little more advanced. So now we're going to move on to the bass clef. Okay, so our bass clef essentially starts our bottom line on G. Okay, and I'm not going to give you a saying for this yet, because I'm going to explain one saying that's going to basically tell you all the letters in every single one of these. So why am I explaining everything separately? Well, like I said, your treble clef tells you where certain notes are, and your bass clef tells you where certain notes are. What are those notes? I will get into that a little later as well, but at the base level, we're just kind of depicting where things are, and we're sort of getting the idea of everything. Okay, so our bass clef is telling us that we start with G on this line, and then we go up to B. And again, I'm not going to have a saying for this one right now, because I'm going to show you a saying in a second that's going to work for all these. Okay, so I don't want to waste your time with that, but it's good to know that your bottom line of your bass clef is a G, and your middle line is a D. Okay, And we're going to compare these and see the similarities between these, which is another good reference point to memorizing things. But first of all, we have G, B, D, F, and then we have A. Okay? G, B, D, F, A. That's the lines of our bass clef. So now we look at our spaces, and we could look at a sort of saying again, and our saying is all cows eat grass. I like to pick sayings that actually make sense. So when you think about cows, you look at cows on the side of the road, you're on a road trip, what are they doing? They're eating grass. That's what cows do. All cows. So all cows eat grass. And pay attention to the letters that I'm writing in the spaces and the lines and correlate them to chords. And I'll explain that in a second, but if you could already do that right now, that might be cool for you to figure that out on your own. So now we have the lines of our bass clef and the spaces. So again, our spaces, all cows eat grass. Okay, so we want to know our C. Then we think, okay, our middle line on this one's actually a D. So one below D is C. Again, it goes up A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then it repeats. So A, the next one would be B, and then we'd have C. So if I did have a C, how would I write that? Well, that's actually pretty easy. So we'll go one above, we'll have a B. Our B will be, I'll just kind of start going up from here. so I'll go A, B, and if there was that B, then since we do have a line, then there would be a depiction that there's a line above it. So we have a B, and that B is, I'm trying to make this line straight, that B is below the next line. So you see where here on a G you would already see that, but our depiction of that is there's a line above this. So okay, so we're looking at one below the next line. So it's our space in between that. You see? We're creating a new sort of set of a line. So this is our new space in between that. So what would fall on that line? What comes after B? So we have C. C comes after the line, and I'm actually going to draw my C right here in the middle. And why am I drawing the C in the middle? Well, that's because this C is actually the C that connects our bass clef to our treble clef. So let me connect this a little further. So we have a C. What would our next note be? Let's think D. Okay, so just like an alphabet, our next note after C is D. So now we have a D. Okay. And now we run into something, because what's our next note after D? Our next note after D is E. Aha! And that actually is the next note. So what's happening is our bass clef is telling us that we're going to have certain notes. We're going to have an A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then we're going to have, basically, it's going to go up to our next octave on our treble clef. Okay, so let's look at this a little further. We have G here. So we have good. We have G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. So our next G is here. So we went up one octave so far. And then we're going to separate B, C, D. So you see that's our next octave right there, E, F. So it's starting on that next octave. And then G, we have another octave, A, B, C, D, E, F. And the funny thing about this C to that next octave is that could actually be looked at as another clef besides our treble and our bass clef. But I'm not going to get into that because that could start confusing some things. But just to keep that in mind, that is a possibility. So what we did is we went up A, B, C, D, F, G, and now our next note is or we went up A, B, C, D. Our next note is E. So we're actually connecting from here to here. Okay, we're creating a bridge between these two clefs. So in that case, I'm going to get away with drawing my D like this, because that's telling me that I am one above this line now, which is one under this line. So now I'm in the new space. If I was going to draw a line here, there'd be a new space. So let's redraw that. That was the sort of explanation, and I think it's actually good that I explained it like that first. So A, so we'll just think, yeah, it actually probably was good that I drew it the first way, explaining it. So now we have a B here, below that line, and then I'll just draw it up here. So A, B, and then our middle note is that C, and it's actually known as middle C. And then we have our next note, which is D, which goes above that, which then leads us to our next notes. So we actually have a row of notes that is separated by a lower sounding version and a higher sounding version. And that's the point of the bass clef being the lower sounding version, and the treble clef known as the higher sounding version. Okay? So let's look at the difference between the bass clef and the treble clef. Let's not think about the octave thing I was talking about, and let's just compare notes. So if we just compare notes, we notice that we have an E here in our treble clef, but we have a G here. And if we look at our bass clef, we just have a G here. So what would be below that G if there was a line? Well, think about it like you're looking at a treble clef. So just think your treble clef is here, so we have an E right there. So what's one below the line of a treble clef? You see we have an E here, and I was telling you one below is C. Okay, this is kind of getting a little confusing. We're jumping from letter to letter. We're not just going up A, B, C, D. So how can we make this less confusing for ourselves? How can we memorize one saying that'll give us all of these progressions on each line, each space, no matter where we are? That one saying is called the circle of thirds. And the circle of thirds, if you're going to learn about the circle of fifths, should be your first step. First, learn about the circle of thirds, really get to know it, understand it, and then move on to the circle of fifths, and you'll have a lot more of a breezy time, and it won't be so confusing. Breezy time, I mean, it'll be a lot easier for you. Okay, so circle of thirds, we have a saying that'll help us remember each letter. That saying is, every good band deserves fans and cash. So you see it's similar to that first thing that I said, and now we repeated it. So now we have it said a second time. Every good band deserves fans and cash. So it's, bands work hard. They deserve to have some people listening to their stuff, and they maybe deserve some cash too. So it's good to actually think about these things in music, whether it's a saying and think about how it makes sense so you can actually think about it, or when I'm doing these things, let's say the sheet music, how it goes up A, B, C, D, F, G, just for an example, it's good to maybe pause the video or step back for a second and think about it and go, oh, okay, so E is our first line, so then our next line would be F, so then that would be, or our next space would be our F, which takes us to the next line, which would be G, and you could start to think about this stuff in your head, and that is where you're gonna draw the line between hearing this and it going in one ear and out the other, and you actually thinking about this stuff and retaining it. The really next step to retaining this stuff is taking notes, because then you can write it down and think about it, and when you write it down, you're literally writing down the thoughts. So it's going to be in your head more, and you're probably going to end up thinking about it later in the day, especially if it's something a little more complex. Sometimes these things take a little while to sink in, so remember that. If you're not really getting something right away, it is probably good to watch it a second time, even if it doesn't quite make sense, so then you can think about it a little extra and wonder what's going on It's always good to, if you have a friend to ask them if they know this kind of stuff. So we have that saying, every good band deserves fans and cash. And that saying is telling us each letter in our circle of thirds. And our circle of thirds, if you saw my first video, shows us how to do a lot of things. I showed you first, it shows us how to build chords. So I built chords with the first video, and then I'm pretty sure that would be the second video. Second video, I showed you how the circle of thirds can help us discover and understand the circle of fifths more and make it faster, more efficient to actually come up with fifths. And now I'm going to show you a breakdown of how this helps you read sheet music better. So the circle of thirds is great. It's good to memorize it. It's a very easy saying to memorize as well. So with that, we have an E, G, B, D, F, A, C again. And if you start to think about chords, well, if you look at this, it has every single one of our chords in it. But first of all, let's talk about why. So why does it have every single one of our chords? Well, first of all, if you look at it as every single one of our letters, it has A, I'll highlight it, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And again, it repeats. So we have all those letters that make up the natural letters in music that we're able to be using here. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, known as natural letters. They're known as natural because they're in a natural state. There's no sharp or flat added to them. So they're natural. So now how do we have every chord from this? Well, if you think about it, the circle of thirds is just taking, if we take A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and if we write that twice, let's see, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, okay? And we go up every third, that's all that we're doing for thirds. So we have an A, C, and an E. Okay, let's check A, C, E. Let's go from that E, we skip G, B, E, G, B. So it's already doing all that for us. So since it already does all that for us, and since music is 7 notes, it's not even, it creates oftentimes and a lot of times this repeating pattern that takes you back to where you started from, and it just keeps recycling. So we can build any chord from this. So I want an F chord, F, A, C. I want an F chord with a 7, F, A, C, E. If you don't understand that, don't worry, but if that clicks something for you, then good, because it's a really easy way to know how to build any chord. So now we are looking at our sheet music. How does this help us read sheet music? Well, let's look. Let's take just the saying in order. So it starts on E. So we already have every good band deserves fans. And remember, that's going up the lines. So now if we think about what would our next line be after fans? And A, the next line, cash. So if we had one line, it would be an A. And then if we had 2 lines, it would be a C. Okay? Let's think about that again. If we have every, what comes before that saying? So it's every good band deserves fans and cash. Cash is C. It's really good to remember that your last thing is cash, because that's a reference point, sort of say. So first is every, last is cash. So we think before every is our last one, so it's cash. Cash, every, good. What I'm trying to explain here is we can think one back and we could think about where that middle C is, or that first line down, and then from there we could think what's below that. Well, it's an A. Now we're at the bass clef. Look at that. So now we're at the bass clef and we're going to think the same thing, but we're starting at G. So all we can say is good bands deserve fans and cash. Brings us up to there, and then it repeats, every good band deserves fans. So not only are we able to build chords with that, we're able to read sheet music easier with that, and it helps us out a lot. So if we know our middle note is D, we could easily think that last line, and we could think DFA, But let's think of the faster way to do it, what I explained earlier. We look at the last line, we know our first space. We know that our first space is all cows eat grass. So we can look at our last line and we can say it's an A. Again, we can look at our last space to kind of maybe flip around the perspective. And we can say, okay, we have a G. And the bass clef starts on a G on the first line. So instantly we can know either the first line or the last space by knowing this first line and this first space. And then we also know our middle, which is a really good reference point. And then we can know several things around that. Like if we're here, we could just think DF. And then we could start memorizing, and don't worry if this makes it confusing, but this might help. You can now think about chords. So if you think about a G chord, GBD, and you could start memorizing your chords, and you could think BDF. So anytime that you think that you're one above a D, if you already know that a D chord is DFA and you have that in your brain, you probably will if you practice this stuff often, then you can automatically think you're on your fourth line, your middle one is D, and you can kind of maybe visualize in your head if you're a visual thinker, and you can say DFA, and bam. Okay? So that's pretty much that. A good way to practice this is to look at sheet music. Let's say you have a favorite song, and to read the notes. And it can be kind of like, a lot of mental work, because you got to sit there, and sometimes you'll have 6 notes in one measure, and each one of those notes will have 3 to 4 notes stacked on top of each other, making a chord. So it's like, wow. Like if let's say you look up Tchaikovsky or something. I love some Tchaikovsky, and you look at some of his stuff, even though it would be looked at as a simpler sort of romantic period compared to like a Baroque period or something like that, you still look at everything and you go, wow, there's such complexity, and I would say just a lot of thought put into it. I mean, the amount of stuff going on in one line of some of these classical composers' musics and their songs, it's phenomenal. And it shows that they probably took their time doing it, and it turned out really good. So it's a lesson learned for me. And now we learned about sheet music a little bit and how to read it, which will hopefully let us, when I talk about the writing music and the music score and the music piece, maybe now this will make a little more sense, and you'll see it's not so intimidating. Okay, that's what a lot of this channel, I really want this to kind of show you that I'm not like a, I'm not like a master degree or anything, or I'm just a guy who loves music, and I've learned a lot of stuff, and now I'm able to do simple things like, put some compositions together on a simple level, and I'm starting to. So I'm sharing that with you and showing you my journey. And I think it's great to have a channel like this, because so many channels are intimidating. You look at them and the person goes, oh, you want to learn how to make music? Well, and they explain this thing to you and you go, well, I'm just gonna quit now. Never gonna happen, because what they're explaining to me is doesn't make any sense to me. And there's this thing in music to where there's two things. One is gatekeepers of information. A lot of people want to keep information sort of and don't want to share it with other people. And I could understand maybe a little bit. I could understand, but I wouldn't do it. To where if people spend a bunch of money on college, maybe they're kind of fed up that they don't want other people just for free to learn everything that they had to spend money and so much time and mental effort to learn. Well, for that I would say, tough life. There's enough stuff online to learn about music, and you're not going to have a one-on-one teacher most of the time unless you pay for it. But what you are going to have is resources at your fingertips and at your choice. So you want to listen to this guy's video or that guy's video, or you want to listen to 2 or 3 people's different video on one subject, which I highly recommend. And then you can see, okay, they're all agreeing that all this stuff, it works this way, so I know this is a fact, that this is how this thing works. And then they each have their own perspective on it, which I find so interesting. Is if you look at multiple teachers on especially YouTube, every single one of them I think was taught differently, so you get a completely different understanding. So this guy will teach you major scales on your guitar even a completely different way than this guy will teach you how to play them, but they'll both make sense and be good practice. So I find that really cool. I'm going to go into the song that I was beginning to compose last time, and let's take a look at it. So this music piece, the whole point of it is to show you that with an understanding of music, basically just music theory, where you know certain relationships between certain notes, chords, and certain fundamental things like that, and certain fundamental things about beat patterns, rhythm, beat hierarchy, just random things that you can find on my channel's videos, you can start to understand how to compose music. And at a beginner level, you can create little pieces like this to where you're just kind of stepping your feet into the water and figuring out how to compose music, what sounds good, what to do, and maybe what your sort of style is. So if you'd like to follow me as I do this, I have the app called MuseScore, which is a free download. This one's actually called MuseScore 3, and it is a free download, 100% free. I don't think it took that much space either. It seemed to download extremely quick, and it's a music notating software, so you could essentially start to compose your own songs. And everything needs a beginning, right? So this is the beginning. You start to understand relationships of notes and how to actually put notes together that sound good when they're together. And by the way, if you look here, I also labeled one below and one above for the lines. You see I did one below, one above, and I did spaces, one below, one above for the bass clef and treble clef. So if you want to go back and look at that, go ahead. It'll probably help you out. So I have this written out here, and how I have this written out here is I just went to my notes and I just started typing things. And how I have this pinned here to, you see I'm clicking and it doesn't go away. So it's really cool. I found something online. It's just called Desk Pins, DESKPINS, Desk Pins. And essentially it allows you, I'm going to remove this pin right now. So normally if I click here, that would disappear, but instead I'm going to pull it up and make sure it's clicked on, and then I'm going to click on my desk pins. I guess tell me it's already running. So it doesn't actually pop up, it shows up in the corner of, it shows up in the corner of where it shows like microphone, Wi-Fi, and those sort of certain things in the corner. I have it kind of hidden from the viewpoint to make the video look better. Basically, I'd click where I would see the desk pin symbol. You'll figure it out if you get it. It's really simple. And then you just click the upper portion of your page. I don't know if you have to click there. You just click on the page, I think, and you see that pin. So that pin is there. If I click the pin, it gets removed, and then again I'm going to put it back up. But if I want to exit, if I click next to the pin and I don't have that X to where it's going to exit it, but I just click minimize, boom, I can minimize it, but the pin's still there for next time. So now I can click all around and it's up for good. Another thing is I could also just click on the notepad and it'll close it down without taking that pin off. So there's that. I thought that might help you out if you want to take notes and stuff. Then you can essentially, like, you could take a video, you could minimize it, and you could fit it to this portion. And then here you could take notes, so you could watch your video, click pause, you could sit here, take your notes, blah, blah, blah. And then you could go back, you could click, or if the person's explaining rather slow, it could actually be a good thing because you could sit here and you could take notes as they're talking. Okay, so we had the C major scale drawn out. Just as a recap, I did this in my first video, and then I'm not sure what's going on there, so I'm just gonna delete that because that's confusing. Then I have the chromatic scale. The chromatic scale means all the letters, all the notes that we have in Western music. So we have A through G, but in A through G we have sharps and flats, and for these videos we're only going to talk about sharps. So sharps are after a note and flats are before a note. So let's think. Not all notes have a sharp and flat, but let's think. We could think A sharp. So A sharp is one after A. So one after A we have A sharp, and that's the same as B flat because B flat is one before B. So if we look at that, we have A and B in the middle of that is A sharp. That same note in the middle would be B flat because it's one before B. But to kind of see where it's already getting kind of confusing, instead of making that confusing, we're only going to talk about sharps in these videos, and that's a really good beginner's thing. I would recommend for sharps and flats to pick whichever one makes more sense for you. For me, it makes more sense to think the note that comes after. So I think A sharp. B, there is no B sharp. I think C sharp. D sharp. It's the one that comes after. It gets more confusing for me when I start to think about A flat because it comes before. You don't go A flat, of course. You'd go A flat, A, B flat, B. I'm just going to stop there. So we're going to use sharps in these videos. And as you can see, there are 12 notes here. Let me label that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. I wrote, whoops. Okay, so you see, there are 12 chromatic notes in our chromatic scale, which are all the notes that we're able to use in Western music and music that we're writing. I call it Western music because in other cultures they might have their music scale tempered in a different way, but that is a completely another topic. Okay, so we also here we had our chords. We had our C major scale. I'll move that right there. Okay, good. Okay, we're looking solid here now. So I have that chromatic scale up there, and then I have the C major scale, C major chords. So here's all the chords in your C major scale, and then in the first video I explained to you chord function. So just as a little recap, we had tonic function, subdominant function, subdominant function, subdominant function, dominant function, tonic function, and dominant function. And these are chord functions. So in this one, I'm going to talk about note functions a little more, but that'll be in a second. And then I went to an A minor harmonic scale. Again, this is all in the first video. Long story short, I took an A minor scale, which it's a relative minor. So it uses the same notes as C major, C through G with no sharps, and it takes that sixth note and goes on from there. A, B, C, D, F, G. That's essentially what we did, but we did a harmonic minor scale. So we raised that seventh note by a half step. And raising that note by a half step, since we just started with G in its natural form, G does have a sharp because B and E are the only ones that don't. So we have a G sharp. So every single one of our chords now contains G sharp. Every single one of our notes being played, every single one of our G notes being played, if we're in our A minor harmonic scale, is now G sharp. Which, for one, kind of distinguishes a little bit further than just being a regular A minor scale, which would share the exact same notes from here. Now there's that one note difference. Okay? This piece, I listened to it. I thought, okay, I like how it's going. And there were a few things, though, that I didn't like. So I'm going to point them out first so maybe you could hear them. The first one, it was going along, and then as it hits this note, I heard a little pause. And you'll notice, it goes dun, 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 dun. Okay, then this one goes dun, 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 dun. So we have that same beat pattern. But for some reason on the first one I liked it, where it went dun, 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 dun. It kind of stops there on both up and down, bass and treble. Let me say that, it's a little better. And then we went dun, dun, and dun, and dun, same thing. We have two quarter notes on the bass and the treble. We have a quarter note up on the bottom and the top stacked on each other, creating a chord. But other than that, what it's doing musically and rhythmically is it's kind of creating a pause. So it's dun, 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 dun. And that's the last note before it moves on to the next measure. And then here we have dun, 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 dun. And with that, I kind of heard another pause. So we had a bum, 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 pause. Bum, pause, bum, bum, bum. So I was like, there's two little pauses there. I don't really know about that. And we're going to listen to that in a second. And then as it went on, I kind of thought, okay, it's sounding pretty good. It's kind of interesting. And then it went about to here, and it was kind of like, oh geez, ouch, that doesn't sound very good. I remember that sounding a little better than it does. So I thought that was kind of funny for one, but it was kind of just like, oof. So let's listen to it. Okay. And then we even have a little idea at the end, a little inspiration. So first off the bat, what sticks out the most to me is here. We're not going to fix it first, we're going to talk about it first. That those notes all stacked on top of each other, they kind of just sounded like a little too much. And a good way to explain that would be kind of muddy. What do you mean by muddy? Well, think of muddy is kind of dirty. So I mean, it's kind of a dirtier sound to it when we hear it. It's not as the clean sound as it could be. So there's a little bit of some dirtiness mixed into that, and we're going to fix that. But in a second, we're going to talk about this. I first want to talk about one simple thing, and that's that if you look at the rhythm of this song, I don't have a bunch of half notes. Let's look at all the half notes. I have a half note here, there, and there. And there. What I'm trying to say, not a whole lot. Each one of those half notes is representing a longer pause in the music. So all of a sudden it's bum. And okay, that's a sense of it being a little longer than usual. Each song is different, but you're going to have a sort of faster, extra fast, and slower notes of a song, what I'm trying to get at. And with that, you have, quarter notes, eighth notes, whatever it is, but you're normally not going to have a bunch of whole notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, quarter notes all mixed into measures one after another, because the rhythm of that's going to be kind of weird. And for one, that what I'm explaining is going to be inconsistent. But even if you tried mixing them in a consistent way, the rhythm for me and a lot of people and a lot of things that I've seen, it could work, but most of the time it ends up pretty weird. And I'm trying to say that a good thing to do is stick with certain notes. So let's look at the majority of the notes that we have here. The majority of the notes that we have here are when we're doing just a regular sounding note. We normally have, and maybe let's say a regular slower sounding note. It's not a very fast, it's not very slow, it's kind of just regular, but it's slower than what comes next, so that's the best way I can explain it. We have our quarter note, and that's dun, dun, dun. So it'd be used for a lot of that. Or if we had one after another, it'd be dun, 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 dun. While our eighth notes are a little quicker, and they're normally kind of heard as a dun, 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 dun. So there's a little more fluency there. And if we listen, you can hear that. So bum, 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 bum. So the bum, the first quarter note, dun, 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 dun. Eighth notes, then dun at the end, quarter note again. So you start to hear these things in your head a little more, and It makes it easier to read the sheet music too when you're able to understand the rhythm, because then you're actually reading the sheet music, you're looking at it, and in your head you're hearing what's being played. And when you start to understand and sort of familiarize yourself with the notes and chords more too, you start to actually be able to hear what's being played, like what's actually being played, the notes and stuff in your head as you're reading it. So the first thing that I did was I looked at this first pause and I said, how can we fix this first pause? And I thought, well, I think what would fit here is a little harmony note. So I'm going to change that quarter note into an eighth note. I'm going to go here. I'm going to look at this. Remember, our G is our first line, so our last space, is also G. So what do we have here? Let's take a second of a pause. We have a G here. And then remember, our first line is E. So E, G. Okay? So we have a G and we have a G. I want to do a harmony note. So I'm actually going to do a B. So I go up one and I do a B. And if you look, it goes G, B, and it goes back down to G. So it's going to create a dun, dun, dun. And why is this a harmony note? Well, if I'm playing a G chord, which we don't actually have a G chord here, but our bass is on our G. So, and what's sounding right here is also a G. So if we're thinking in terms of a G chord, what would harmonize with that G chord would be G, B, D if we're looking at a triad, because that would be our chord. So if I pick any of those three notes and generally think about a harmony note, you are going to be thinking about your 3 and your 5 if you're thinking about a chord. But we have a third here. So we have a G, B, G. And with that harmony note, it's going to take us up high, but it's not going to take us to the next step for one. It's going to take us up a third, so it's going to give us that nice sound, but it's going to give us the sound as if we played the one and those chords. And one thing to talk about that's good with music is, well, normally chords will be built stacked on top of each other. So you'll notice that a lot of times I'm actually building chords horizontally instead of vertically. So what I mean by that is if I have a C, E, G chord, I have a C and then an E and then a G being played one after another, and that's building a C chord but horizontally throughout time and not all at once. So music is sort of the experience of listening to something and then remembering that and progressing forward, hearing more stuff, remembering all of that, and then progressing forward and forward. And now we're a minute into the song and remembering everything we heard before that and how it's correlating and sort of interacting and responding to what's going on now. And that's the whole act of music. If we forgot everything that was happening and we were just hearing what was happening now, well, what would be happening now would be just relevant to itself and it wouldn't be the song. So that note would have no relationship or relevance to any other note. So it's cool to think about how music is something that kind of exists in our head for the most part of it, and we're only hearing a moment of it, and we're relating it to all the other stuff that's already in our head. I find that really interesting. So with that, I'm kind of talking about how I'm building a chord, but I'm building it horizontally. So with that, it's kind of like, okay, so this note's already in my head, and as that note's already in my head, I'm playing this note, which harmonizes with this note. Okay? So then I looked at my second pause, and I thought, well, my second pause, if I added a harmony note, and I went up from here, let's say a third, then all of a sudden I'd be looking at the same note as here. I don't want to do that. So we are looking at a C. If you remember, our middle C is one down from the treble or one up from the bass. Excuse me. So if we're looking one up from the bass here, we'd have the same note as if we're looking at what's from our reference point is our treble clef. So we have a C. I'm going to change that into an eighth note. I'm going to go over one. Make sure you go over one because it'll change that note you clicked on if you don't. With C, so the next note up, C, D, E. So as you can see, now it's going C, D, E, and then it actually does skip to G. Okay, but other than that, what happens is it's creating more of a transition that's going up that goes step to step to step, and then it does a leap, but it's going to sound nicer with those steps. So let's listen to that so far. So you see, it kind of added some more flow to it, and it's almost like it wanted to move on more to the next part, and I think it also sounded better too. And if you notice, we still had the dun, dun, and dun, and dun, but we had it mixed in with the eighth notes, so you still heard that same rhythmic pattern, but it was counterpointed on the treble for one, but then as well, we had just our eighth notes like we did here. So we have that same sound, but the build up to it is these eighth notes. Okay? Next, I was thinking this was kind of like an ouch, and it sounded kind of muddy. So it was the first thing that comes to mind when I think about removing muddiness. If I'm stacking two full chords on top of each other, well, removing the thirds. And it's a good practice, and it's something that I've heard before, is to not repeat thirds when you're going, when you're stacking chords basically, or when you're just doing a lot of notes. It's good to not stack your thirds because it can kind of create some muddiness to it. So let's listen to how it sounded before. Okay, and now I'm going to take out the thirds on the bass. Why in the bass? Well, because if I take out the thirds, in the bass, that could actually be more of like my muddier sounding side. So if I think in terms of my bass notes being a little muddier and my treble notes being a little brighter, that probably actually does make a lot of sense. That probably is more correct. And I'm saying probably because a lot of this is perspective. It could probably genuinely be accepted that your lower notes can have some more muddiness to them compared to your higher notes. This, let's say the same note, high or low. So now I took out those thirds in the bass clef. I kind of explained a little why too. So now I got rid of some of that muddiness. Let's hear it. To me, it sounds much better, and much more like the sound that I actually want to go for. And I actually ended up keeping this because I thought I actually kind of like that. So let's just hear the piece in full now. There we go. Okay, so now I want to talk about some stuff. One of the first things I want to talk about is how the world's crazy right now, but we shouldn't panic too much. We should take what's going on right now, and we should see where it's pointing us and figure out new solutions and new ways to live that can help better us and the people around us. Scary times right now. There's a lot going on, but what can we do in these times to make a new beginning and maybe a new, better life for the next generation? Because I think that if you could take what's going on right now and think in context of where's this pointing us, if this is pointing us somewhere, where's it pointing us? I think that brings us to a lot of good solutions for a lot of problems that we had even before the current state in the day and age. Okay? Second, I want to talk about how it's really good, like I was saying, to sort of create a new imaginative way to express what's going on in your head to be able to memorize it better. And I was thinking about how when I was a kid, how I would see a lot of animated things animated through music. So there'd maybe be like certain superheroes, and each of the superheroes would have a certain theme song or sound that would go with them, and it kind of would describe them, and it would express them. And I was sort of just laying down and thinking about this one night, and I was thinking, wow. I was thinking, wait a second. I started thinking about Tom and Jerry, and I started thinking about how it's essentially a show that has no talking. You just have people running around, you have maybe some sound effects, some yawning, something crashing, but the most of the dialogue that's being expressed is literally music. And it's actually classical music. So you get like an orchestral sort of, I don't know if it's a symphony, but so you get an orchestral piece with all these orchestral instruments, and you have this nice musical piece in every Tom and Jerry episode describing every scene, every little thing that happens. There's music with it. When they're walking, there's ding 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 ding. Something crashes. There's like a wham, or like some sort of sound that helps emphasize it even more. And I found that so interesting because I watched a lot of Tom and Jerry when I was younger, and I loved it. And now growing up, I went back the other day, I searched up Tom and Jerry because I was thinking about this, and I watched, probably like a minute or two. But I thought, wow, this is so much different now that especially that I'm into music now and composition and stuff. It's a whole different thing now. And I actually have more appreciation for it now, for one thing, but it's very interesting to see all the expression through only music, and how as a kid it was a second language to me. I just looked at it and it made sense. I heard the sounds and they were describing the visuals, and it all made sense, and it was kind of training my inner musician to some extent, which I find really entertaining and really cool. The next, I was thinking about another show. I was thinking about how the Pink Panther was another show, and I'm pretty sure it's the same thing, to where there's not really any talking, there's some sound effects, and then there's music. But I didn't really like Pink Panther, and I wondered why, so I looked it up, and I saw that there was a lot of jazz music. And at first I thought, aha, that, definitely is what it was, and I think that's what it was. But now when I look at it and watch it, I was actually like, wow, this is actually kind of cool. They're playing some jazz music, and then they also do some classical music too, but it's kind of a mixture of them, and maybe even a fusion at some point between them, which is kind of interesting. But Pink Panther, now I look at it, it's like I actually wouldn't mind watching that now if I was a kid, with the same sort of mindset, understanding and appreciating music more. I would actually probably enjoy watching it more. Next, I did kind of talk about this in my last video, but it's developing oral skills and being able to basically recreate things in your head, or through whistling, or through patterns, or in your instrument. But being able to hear something and being able to essentially memorize it or recreate it and remember that sound. And that's a very base level that will start to help you understand what's going on in music. Then, how do we develop a musical passion? How do we become more passionate about music? And I think I have a pretty good answer for that, actually. And I think that depends on the person individually. So you look at certain people. So this guy likes to go on Ableton and create crazy music, and this person over here likes to play the piano and recreate a sort of classical sound. And then there's this guy over here who likes to sing a bunch. There's this guy who likes to play his guitar, shred his guitar. This guy likes to play his saxophone. So we have a lot of different people. I'm naming instruments, but okay, we have a singer, not always instruments. And we have the guy on the Ableton, not always instruments. So I hear a lot of times when people think about musicianship and becoming a musician, they often correlate it to an instrument, which makes a lot of sense, but it's not your only route to get there. So my great advice that I think that I have is that the individual person who's thinking about becoming a musician should figure out what interests them and they should focus on that. So for me, what really interests me is the theory aspects of how I can make sense of all this stuff, actually make sense of it, and then composition. How can I actually create music with this knowledge and actually create music that I am proud of, that I enjoy, and it's not just notes being put together that sound good, but there's more of a reasoning behind it. And for me, that is amazing because I can go through with what I'm doing with a reason and a plan and execute that plan and reason, make it come to life, and not have to only rely on my ear to say, does this sound good or does that not sound good, which is also a method, but now I can do both of those. So that's really cool. How did I start doing that? Which is funny. I kind of want to tell my backstory to kind of give you an idea. I was with a buddy, and he showed me some of his buddies, and they have a band, and they started playing, and they have a little studio. So I went into their little studio thing, and they all started jamming out and playing their songs. They have their own personally written songs. They own them and stuff. They actually have a copyright as well, which I think is really cool. But they're playing all these songs. I'm listening to it, and I'm thinking in my head, wow, there's people just coming together, strumming these instruments. Some guy's hitting the drums, and one guy's just, kind of just singing into a microphone and stuff. But right there, I had this really good feeling. Just like, wow, these people are just hitting these things, plucking these things, putting their voice into a microphone, and I'm sitting here and getting an amazing experience. And it's great what music can do. It can relax you. It can make you feel like you're thinking about the unknown, let's say. It can make you think about sad things. It can make you think about space, dreams, So music is quite profound, the places it can take you mentally. And I think it's good to always stay motivated and to find something that will keep you motivated, but not only motivated, but interested. Because I think those things go hand in hand. You got to be interested in something to stay motivated, and vice versa. And they really complement each other. And in order to find your interest, you're going to kind of just have to develop and find it. So how did I find my interest? Well, I was with those guys. They're playing their instrument and stuff. And I thought to myself, that'd be really cool if I could do this. And I told that to them. I said, it's been my dream my whole life to be able to make music. And seeing you guys actually do it is really inspiring and shows me a glimpse of how it could be done, basically. And they shook their head, and they all smiled, and they all said, yeah. And I think every single one of them said, you should go buy a guitar. Because I told them I told them the music I like and the artists I like, and they noticed that my top music was guitar-based music or music with guitars, and a lot of my favorite artists were people who played the guitar, like Jerry Garcia and David Gilmour and stuff like that. And they started getting me to realize that I actually appreciate the instrument a lot, just the sound of it. So they say, hey, you should go buy one and, play around with it, make some music. I thought, sounds like a good idea. If these guys are telling me that, they see that there's a possibility of me actually doing it, which I didn't see before myself. So I thought, I'll go out and buy one. I went and bought the guitar. And in the very beginning, I was amazed and let down at the same time. I was amazed that I could pluck this thing and start to create music. And then I was kind of let down that it didn't sound how I wanted it to. And the main thing was the sound that was coming out was just not the sound that I would hear on my favorite bands. So I did research, and I found out my amp that I originally got was a piece of junk. And I ended up buying a tube amp. And the tube amp was a real game changer. I ended up actually hearing my guitar tone and saying, wow, it actually sounds like how a guitar should sound, like I would hear on my favorite artist's album. So then after that, I thought, okay, this is cool. I have my guitar toned down, it sounds cool. So let's start playing some music. So I learned, what everyone learns. I learned the pentatonic scale, and then I learned I learned the major scales as well. So then I could start playing some stuff. And just like what most guitarists in the beginning say, it's the same thing. I was kind of stuck on those scales. I'd play, let's say, jam tracks or stuff, and I'd just play those scales over and over. And one, it got very boring very quick, and two, the sound got very boring very quick. I started developing some really cool blues sounds, some blues licks and stuff. But then I would want to break free and do some other stuff, and I really couldn't. And then I wanted to kind of make those blues licks have some more expression in them, you know? Like, I like to think of an instrument almost like as someone talking. It's like, how can I make this guitar speak to someone more clearly so they understand what I'm saying with it more? I couldn't do that. So, okay, something's off. What do I got to do? And I started researching my favorite guitarists. One would be Warren Haynes. I started looking at some of his reviews, and I started what led me there is he's an amazing guitarist. He can do like anything. So I thought, what does he know? You know? Started watching his videos and his reviews and stuff, and he talks about basically like he'll look at someone playing and he'll describe it as, oh, they just played a C major 7 and then they, went to a flat, I don't know what to say, like a flat third degree of the D scale or something. For something that may sound fancy to someone who doesn't know. For me, that sounded like some fancy stuff that I didn't know at the time. So I thought, wow, this guy understands the music theory stuff that some of those people do, and I thought maybe that's how he understands all this stuff and is able to recreate, essentially, it seems like, any genre that he wants, and does a really good job at it. So that's when I started learning music theory. I started looking at music theory. I'd look up these music theory videos and I'd try to make sense of it with my guitar, and I started having a little trouble, and that's what led me to think even deeper. I thought, each one of these teachers teaching me is teaching me on a piano. Even if they're a guitar teacher teaching me music theory for my guitar, basically every single one of them would begin teaching me on a piano. So I'll go, okay, they're teaching me on a piano, there must be something to this piano. And I'd see it in like every single one. So then I started analyzing the piano, and I saw that, well, you have your white notes and you have your black notes, and they're separated, and your white notes are your natural notes, no sharps, no flats. And then your black notes are only your sharp notes, or if you're looking at it as flats, only your flat notes. So I thought, wow, when you're looking at a guitar, you just have everything going in order in the same space. So this space to that space could be a B to C, but it could also be a C to a C sharp. So that right there is already confusing, but on a piano, if you play all the white notes, you have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then if you have all the black notes, you only have the sharps associated with the notes that have the sharps. There's only the notes for the sharp notes. So I thought, I'm going to have to buy a piano. I went on OfferUp. I found a piano. It was like $30 or something, and that was a breakthrough for me, because after that, I went and I watched this interval video on intervals. I'm going to have one out that'll be really good soon. And it was saying, you need to know your differences between certain intervals. You need to know the spacing between them and the amount of semitones and stuff, and all the stuff that when I looked at that on my guitar, oh my gosh, my brain wanted to explode. I thought, never in my life. But then I started realizing that buying a piano and studying the theory on my piano, now I can pick up my guitar, and now my guitar makes more sense. And now I can play it easier and better. And now when I learn like a scale or something, I can retain it faster, because I've learned stuff to actually make sense of what's going on. And for me, that was huge in this musical process, is making sense of everything. Because I didn't want to just play a B chord and learn what the notes were. I wanted to learn what a B chord was, why I was playing those three notes, and yada 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 even furthermore. And now I could tell you, so let's look at a D chord. I could tell you a D chord is just D, F, and A, and in its natural state of D, F, and A, it's a minor, and if you did D, F sharp, and A, now you have a major D chord, and just simple things like that. I could look at the guitar now, and I could build a D chord, and I could build it in a few different ways now, and actually understand what I'm playing, and if I'm playing an inverted D chord, a first inversion, let's say, now I know I just take my D and I put it at the end of it, so now I have a F, A, and D. Okay, so it's not that hard. So that's why I really highly recommend to anyone out there who's struggling in music, or let's say if they're confused about anything in music, I would say just grab the pen and paper, start learning about music theory, because that's what I did, and now so much stuff makes more sense, and now I'm actually able to write music, read music, and do a lot more that I thought was going to be way far in the future, and now it's coming to me right now. Another way to sort of find that passion in music is to understand its correlation in your life already. So think about the music you listen to already, how it makes you feel, what it does to you, why you listen to it, and then furthermore from there, think about all the music that you don't choose to listen to, but it's already in your life. So when you look at commercials, when you look at a movie, when you're out and about, when you're essentially doing many things, especially anything that has to do with any sort of media, commercial, or anything like that, you're generally going to have music behind it or with it, sharing a certain expression, helping the undertone of it, or to some degree doing something. And to realize how music is seemingly everywhere, you start to realize how big of a part of your life it actually is. And it can be kind of profound. It's like if you never thought about how you always have to breathe, you may not think about the fact that you literally are sitting here all the time. You're always having to breathe in and out and stuff like that. But if you think about it, okay, yeah, it's one of those things that you do it so often that you don't think about it. We have music around us so often that we don't really realize how much there is around us. There's a whole lot, and we're kind of blinded by it because there's so much of it. So then, what woke up music for me? I sort of all of a sudden recently got a lot more into music. Before that, I was into music, let's say 2 years ago or something. But now all of a sudden, I'm super into music. It's a big passion. I have a YouTube channel. I'm wanting to create music and stuff like that. So what kind of happened? And, well, I could explain it simply as I started working, and I wanted to play music at work to make work a little better. And with that, I wanted to, with my mindset, listen to kind of different things every day. I didn't want to find an album and listen to it the same day and over. And on the flip side of that, I also didn't want to go on Pandora and have it play random songs for me. Because, for one, I don't always like the songs that it recommends. Actually, a lot of times I do. But the big problem I have with Pandora is sometimes it'll work for a month or something if you find a new channel. And you listen to all these new songs. And you won't even have to like anything, and it'll still do this. Then it'll just get those same songs and it'll replay them again and again and again in different orders. So essentially, Pandora radio just turns into any other radio, in my opinion. Not a fan. So instead, I went on YouTube. I started, first of all, re-listening to all the albums and bands I grew up with. So I started re-listening to Electric Light Orchestra. I started re-listening to Moody Blues. I definitely listened to some Beatles too. I listened to some David Bowie. A lot of people I grew up with. And then I started kind of getting into some more jam bands and stuff. I listened to some more Allman Brothers. I thought this was great, which led me to listen to some more kind of improv music. And then, let alone, I randomly heard Grateful Dead one time for my first time actually listening to it on my own and hearing it and paying attention to it. And what started playing was Fire on the Mountain, Scarlet Begonia, Fire on the Mountain. And I remember hearing it and thinking, you know, this is a total groove. It's kind of a little different than any of the other songs that were playing. All the other songs, they were different, but they had a similar nature. This one has a different nature to it, and I really like it, and it's putting me in the mood. And I kind of voiced that to someone, saying, hey, it's pretty good. And they said, oh, it's Grateful Dead. I thought, oh, Grateful Dead, I haven't really given them a whole lot of a chance. I haven't really listened to any of their stuff, so I don't really even know what they're about. So I thought, let me look into them. I was trying to find new bands at the time. So, long story short, I love the Grateful Dead now. I've listened to probably most of their stuff. I have on my other channel, I have a Grateful Dead playlist, and that has a lot of videos on it. It has probably most of their songs and stuff actually on that one playlist. So then, from there, I started listening to some more jam bands and stuff like that. I started getting interested in the rock and roll improv sort of, an improvisation sort of style of music. And that was a huge breakthrough for me, because I started listening to music in a new way. I never really liked the improv music before. To me, before, it sounded like an undirected and an undialogued thing that was kind of just going all over the place, and I didn't understand it. But the funny thing is how I can listen to it now, and it's different, and how you can develop your musician's ear more and appreciate more sort of complex or further out sort of music, understanding the nature of it. So I started listening to some more improv music. It started with the improv rock bands and stuff like that, Grateful Dead, Allman Brothers, and then there was a band that really broke a lot of strings for me and led me in a lot of new directions, and that was Little Feat. And by feet, I mean like featuring Kendrick Lamar or something, not like your feet as toes and feet, but F-E-A-T. So Little Feat. And the album that I first listened to, I think it was called Waiting for Columbus, something Columbus. And wow, I highly recommend that, as if you're going to get into Little Feat, starter album. If you're going to get into jam bands, starter album. It is a great album. It shows them, in my opinion, kind of when the band was at a peak, when they were playing, when they had their sounds really well, and their musicianship, instruments, and everything was just tuned in so well. It was great. So I highly recommend listening to the Little Feat, the album Waiting for Columbus. But where that led me was, it led me in a way, kind of away from rock a little bit, because you listen to that album and you start to hear some sort of more funk, some more jazz in it, and I started liking that sound more. And then I started branching out to some more artists. So the main one for me was Van Morrison, and still is. I find Van Morrison phenomenal. It's probably my favorite artist of all time. And after his latest album recently, that just got released, probably solidifies that even more, that he is my favorite artist. So Van Morrison. But then also I started listening to some Steve Winwood. So Steve Winwood's very interesting. He's been in some bands like Traffic, and he was also in Blind Faith, and also did a good amount of solo work as well. And I really recommend checking out his solo work. That's really cool. There's one album called Arc of a Diver, and that was his solo album. So he did the drums, the bass, the guitar, the keyboard and stuff, and you can kind of see on the song Midnight Train, to where it's Night Train, and he's playing the keyboard, he's doing the guitar, he's doing the singing. He wrote everything too, and I find it really cool. He probably even had the idea for the video as well. So the whole point, a really creative person. The nature of him seems like to create. So I find that very inspiring. Another cool thing is, now that I'm studying music, now that I re-listen to my songs that I used to listen to, or my favorite songs from growing up, or even my favorite songs from a year ago, I can re-listen to them now, and it's a different experience, because I'm breaking the music down more. What is going on is, now that I started realizing each of the different instruments, now I'll hear a drum and a bass guitar and a piano playing, and I'll hear the rhythm guitar as well, and I'll hear everything kind of separated now. And even with other, like orchestration or something, or like a symphony or something as well, you can start to hear the different instruments, when you start to familiarize yourself with what these different instruments sound like. Yeah, so I think with music, it's just kind of a thing of pick your own. Everyone has a different way of how they want to get into the music, and some people just want to listen to it, some people just want to play it, some people just want to write it, some people want to do a little bit of everything. So no matter what you are, I would not listen to what other people are saying if they're giving you advice that is saying you have to do this, you have to do that, because essentially music is the study of sounds, and certain notes are sounds. So we're basically just studying certain sounds, relationships between certain sounds, and a lot of music theory is just how people have conventionally agreed upon certain topics. Okay, so that does not mean that it's a fact. It just means that typically and usually people agree, yes. Okay? Another thing to kind of think about is how modern music has its pros and cons. Everything has pros and cons. And I think one con of the modern music is actually how perfect we try to make it. We have all these tools to be able to create everything perfectly clean, everything perfectly on the beat, everything to a perfect exact measurement of where it should be, everything perfectly in pitch and not even a little bit out of that range, every person's voice perfectly in tune, yada yada yada. The list goes on. We have all this technology to make things so perfect, but perfect is not the nature of humans. And music is expressing sort of, I think, our inner self, our inner emotions, and maybe a lot of people, let's say, could argue differently. Their music might depict different things for them. But for me, music is an expression of the soul, and it's the soul's expression, and with that, you get each individual soul expressing a sort of different thing. Alright, so that is it for this Music Monday. I mainly wanted to show how to read the music, and I hope that helped. If there's still any added confusion, please let me know in the comments, and let me know what you're confused about, and I will try to help clear that confusion. Thank you.